Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Death Race in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, West Films. Friends, in today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Death Race. I'm also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by West Films. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production filming, post-production budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the ends. So let's start the video. Death Race is a 2008 disto action thriller film written and directed by Paul W. S. Anderson. It stars Jason Statham, Tyrese Gibson, Ian McShane, and Joan Allen. Though referred to as a remake of the 1975 film Death Race 2000, which in turn is based on Ib Melchior's short story, The Racer. In reviews and marketing materials, director Paul W. S. Anderson stated in the DVD commentary that he thought of the film as something of a prequel. A remake had been in development since 2002, though production was delayed by disapproval of early screenplays, then placed in turnaround following a dispute between Paramount Pictures and the producer duo Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner. The latter was the producer without Cruise in the film. Death Race was acquired by Universal Pictures, and Anderson rejoined the project to write and direct. Filming began in Montreal in August 2007, and the completed project was released on August 22, 2008. The film received mixed reviews from critics and grossed $76 million worldwide. 3 direct-to-video films in the series were then released: Death Race 2, 2010, Death Race 3, Inferno, 2013, and Death Race Beyond Anarchy, 2018. Plot. Prologue. In 2012, the collapse of the U.S. economy and the subsequent increase in crime rates leads to the rise of privatized prisons. One such prison is Terminal Island Penitentiary, whose warden, Claire Hennessy, earns profits from broadcasting Death Race, a vehicular combat racing series. Throughout each event, Terminal Island inmates battle each other in specially modified, weaponized, and armored cars on an enclosed track filled with obstacles and traps, with the goal of winning their freedom. In 2020, in the final round of an event, a masked driver nicknamed Frankenstein is nearing the finish line, pursued by his rival Machine Gun Joe. His navigator, Case, reports that all of his defensive weapons have malfunctioned. Against her protests, Frankenstein, who is one win away from freedom, refuses to let Joe finish first. Case ejects herself out of the car just before Joe destroys it with a rocket launcher. Present, industrial worker and ex-con Jensen Ames struggles to support his family. When the steel mill he works at is closed, he returns home to his wife Susie and their newborn daughter Piper. A masked assailant knocks him unconscious. Jensen wakes up with a bloodied knife in his hand, Susie dead nearby, and policemen storming into his home and arresting him. He is sentenced to life imprisonment, while Piper is placed in foster care. 6 months later, Jensen is transferred to Terminal Island Prison. Warden Hennessy's second-in-command, Ulrich, calls Jensen to her office. Hennessy reveals that Frankenstein had died from his injuries and offers Jensen freedom in exchange for standing in for Frankenstein for one event. Jensen accepts the offer and meets Frankenstein's crew consisting of Coach, Gunner, and Lists. They suspect Hennessy wants him to become the new Frankenstein to regain audience and profits, which has dwindled since Frankenstein's absence. On the first day of the 3-day event, Jensen meets his navigator, Case. During the race, his vehicle's defensive equipment again mysteriously malfunctions. Jensen sees Pachenko perform the same hand gesture at him as the masked assailant and realizes Pachenko killed his wife. Distracted, Jensen is blindsided by Joe, causing him to finish last. After the race, Jensen attacks Pachenko, prompting him to admit the truth. Hennessy ordered him to frame Jensen so she could have a replacement for Frankenstein. On the second day, Jensen threatens to eject Case unless she explains the truth about the malfunctions. Case admits she was offered release papers in exchange for sabotaging Frankenstein's car to keep him from winning. Jensen catches up to Pachenko and tricks him into slamming his car head-on into a concrete barrier. He then exits the car and kills Pachenko by snapping his neck. Hennessy unleashes the Dreadnought, a multi-weapon tanker truck, to make the races more exciting. After the Dreadnought violently massacres most of the racers, Jensen works with Joe to destroy it, enraging Hennessy. The second day ends with Jensen and Joe as the only survivors. Hennessy orders Ulrich to plant a bomb underneath Jensen's car. She offers Jensen rewards to keep racing as Frankenstein, which he rejects. Jensen approaches Joe and proposes a cooperation. On the final race, Hennessy manipulates the racetrack to deprive Jensen of both offensive and defensive abilities, letting Joe freely chip away at his armor. Joe shoots a rocket at Jensen's car and misses, as shown in the prologue, destroying a portion of the wall, which both cars drive through. They get to the bridge towards mainland. Hennessy activates the bomb, but it was already deactivated and removed. Pursued by helicopter to a railway depot, Jensen jumps out of the car as Case takes his place, donning the Frankenstein mask and outfit. While the pursuer capture Case, Joe and Jensen escape on a freight train. Despite the escapes, Hennessy is happy with the rating. She opens a present, only to find the bomb intended for Jensen. Coach remotely detonates the bomb, killing both Hennessy and Ulrich. He then turns to the audience and says, "I love this game," as the screen fades to black. 6 months later, Joe and Jensen work in Mexico as mechanics with Piper in Jensen's custody. They are soon reunited with Case, who has won a muscle car in a card game and stays with them. Cast: Jason Statham as Jensen Ames, a falsely accused convicted prisoner coerced to drive in the arena, taking the name Frankenstein from the man who came before him. He kills 2 racers, Travis Colt and Slovo Pachenko, at the race. Joan Allen as Hennessy, a sadistic prison warden who is the controller of the death race. Ian McShane as Coach, Frankenstein's loyal head mechanic and a voluntary inmate, since he feels that the outside world is not worthy enough. Tyrese Gibson as Machine Gun Joe, a sociopathic racer who looks to use death race as a means to escape from prison. He alone uses male navigators due to his habit of killing his navigators or them dying during the race. He has won 3 races, killed 16 racers including Hector Grimm, and wishes to win so he can leave for Miami. Natalie Martinez as Case, Frankenstein's navigator. In prison for killing her husband, an abusive cop, she has a few years left to serve and was given release papers in exchange for sabotaging the car of the previous Frankenstein. Max Ryan as Pachenko, a Russian rival driver with whom Ames clashes several times, who also killed Ames' wife and framed him for it. He is the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood in the prison. He has won 3 races and killed 9 racers. Jason Clarke as Ulrich, Hennessy's second-in-command and sadistic prison guard. Frederick Kohler as Lists, another member of Frankenstein's pit crew and a compulsive data collector. He is in prison for murdering his abusive mother. Jacob Vargas as Gunner, Frankenstein's car repairman. Justin Mader as Travis Colt, a disgraced ex-NASCAR driver seeking to rebuild his career by winning the race. He has won 2 races and killed 5 racers. Robert Lasardo as Grimm, a certified psychopath driving in the race who loves and worships Hennessy, believing her to be the avatar of the Hindu goddess Kali. He has won 2 races and killed 12 people in the race. Robin Show as 14K, a 10th-generation triad member sent to business school who holds a degree from MIT. He has won 2 races and killed 7 racers. He killed 14 fighters in the death match. David Carradine as Frankenstein voiceover, the most popular driver in the history of death race. Cameo voiceover, reprising his role from the original 1975 film Death Race 2000. Production. In March 2005, following the success of Alien vs. Predator 2004, director Paul W.S. Anderson revealed that he was directing a remake of Death Race 2000 1975, entitled Death Race 3000 at Paramount Pictures, based on a script by J.F. Lawton. The remake would be produced by the producer pair Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner. Anderson described the remake as a riff on the first film. It's not a straight remake at all. The first movie was an across-America race. This will be an around-the-world race, and it's set further in the future, so the cars are even more futuristic. So you've got cars with rockets, machine guns, force fields, cars that can split apart and reform, a bit like Transformers, cars that become invisible, the director explained. ComingSoon.net reported that Paul saw his film almost as a prequel, if anything. Almost the genesis of the death race, though the film is referred to primarily as a remake in reviews and marketing materials. 2 years later, Roger Corman, the producer of Death Race 2000, elaborated that he had an option agreement with producer Tom Cruise, and that Cruise would portray the lead role. The director said that Cruise had not been happy with the first 2 screenplays, and that a third one was underway. In June 2006, producer Jeremy Bolt reported that Anderson would direct the remake of Death Race 2000 after completing Resident Evil. Extinction, 2007. The producer described the remake's new tone. We've basically taken the idea of reality television and extended it 20 years, so it's definitely a comment on society and particularly reality television, but it is not as much a parody or a satire as the original. It's more straight. The following August, Paramount ended its relationship with Cruise Wagner Productions, and Death Race was placed in turnaround. According to reports, when the project was discovered available, Universal Studios acquired it. Cruise and Wagner resumed their roles as producers, and Anderson returned to write and direct the film. In April 2007, actor Jason Statham entered negotiations to star in Death Race, with production slated to begin in late summer or early fall. Anderson described that Death Race would take place in a prison, and that the film would be super violent, like its predecessor. It has little echoes of the original. A lot of people get run down, but rather than having the point system, which had no payoff anyway, it's a pure race. It's more like Gladiator, with the last person standing, or driving, winning, explained the director. Filming on Death Race began in Montreal in August 2007. Reception. Critical response. The film drew generally mixed reviews from critics. Review aggregator Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 42% rating based on reviews from 160 critics with an average rating of 5.00/10. The website's critical consensus states, mindless, violent, and lightning-paced, Death Race is little more than an empty action romp. Metacritic reports a rating of 43 out of 100 based on reviews from 23 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews, 15. Audiences polled by CinemaScore during opening weekend gave the film an average grade of B+ on a scale ranging from A+ to F. Robert Kohler of Variety called Death Race as hard as metal and just as dumb, and criticized it for removing the humor of Death Race 2000. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the film half a star out of 4, calling it an assault on all the senses, including common. Keith Phipps of the AV Club said the film is ideal for those who want to watch a bunch of cars blow each other up without having to think about it all that much. Mark Savlov of the Austin Chronicle called Death Race one of the most boring drags of all time. Peter Hartlaub of the San Francisco Chronicle called the film an ill-advised and severely wussified remake. Elizabeth Weitzman of the New York Daily News gave the film 1.5 stars out of 4, calling it junk, and saying that the chases are pretty cool, but there's absolutely nothing else to see. A positive review came from Nathan Lee of the New York Times, who said that the movie is legitimately greasy, authentically nasty, with a good old-fashioned sense of laying waste to everything in sight. James Berardinelli of Real Views awarded Death Race a score of 2.5 stars out of 4, saying that it's weak when it comes to things like plot, character, and acting, but it's very good at provoking visceral reactions. Box office. The film grossed $75,677,550, of which $36,060,032 was from North America. Release. The film was originally scheduled for release on September 26, 2008, but was moved to August 22, 2008. Home media. The DVD and Blu-ray were released in the United States on December 21, 2008. There was also an unrated edition released. The Blu-ray version of the movie features a digital copy of the film. In the DVD commentary, Anderson further elaborates on his thought of the movie as a prequel more than a remake. Music. The score to Death Race was composed by Paul Haslinger and conducted by Tim Davies. Haslinger recorded the string portion of his score with the Hollywood Studio Symphony at the Sony scoring stage. The soundtrack was released on August 19, 2008. Prequels and sequel. Main articles: Death Race 2, Death Race 3 Inferno, and Death Race Beyond Anarchy. The film is followed by two direct-to-video prequel films, Death Race 2 2010 and Death Race 3 Inferno 2013. Both take place before this film and were filmed in South Africa. The films were directed by Raul Raine and star Luke Goss, Tanit Phoenix, Danny Trejo, and Ving Rhames all appeared in the prequels. Lists and 14K are the only returning characters and are portrayed by Frederick Kohler and Robin Shue, respectively. A fourth film is a direct-to-video sequel to the first film, titled Death Race Beyond Anarchy 2018, also featuring Lists, making him the only character to appear and be played by the same actor in all four films. In Death Race, there are people and there are cars, and the two entities are really similar. People smash into people. Cars smash into cars. Sometimes cars smash into people. I suppose there is a difference. The cars don't talk to each other or spit in each other's food. But when the people in this film talk to each other, they might as well be revving their engines or honking their horns. There isn't very much character development. To be fair, there is a bit. There isn't absolutely none. The film is based on Death Race 2000, a movie made in the 1970s about a future dystopia in which people race to the death. One interesting thing is that, in those days, people imagined that this particular dystopian future would take 2.5 decades to arrive. But this version is set in 2012. These days, we're much more impatient. I settled down in the cinema, which was about a quarter full, and sipped at my coffee. There was a sense that we were not expecting anything too great. In the film, Jason Statham is an ex-racing driver. He has stopped driving for, I think, some dark reason I didn't catch, possibly because there's a lot of background noise in this movie. Maybe he's killed somebody on the track. Maybe he's just lost it. He's called Jensen Ames, named after the Jensen Interceptor, a classic sports car. He is lavishly, although not densely, tattooed, a tormented fighter rather than a heavy metal geek. He is cool. He has no discernible emotions. There is nothing very complicated under the bonnet. Anyway, he gets put in prison. The dystopia is as follows. People in prison have a choice. They can either stay in prison or they can race to the death in mad cars and win their freedom. At least that's the deal offered by the prison's icy governess, played by Joan Allen. But is she being honest? Meanwhile, these death races are America's most popular sport, with huge ratings, and the whole thing absolutely stinks with corruption. If you want a much more nuanced version of this type of thing, manly men, corrupt sport, and a sexy bossy woman in charge, check out Oliver Stone's film about American football, Any Given Sunday. But back to this film. What does Statham do? Of course, he decides to risk racing to the death. You'd think as an ex-racing driver he would jump at the chance, but he doesn't. He broods for a while. But then he decides that yes, he'll race to the death. This is the bit of character development I mentioned earlier. Did I say that he's in prison having been framed for murdering his wife? Well, that's the situation. He minds about this, but not overly. Just like he minds when people try to kill him, but not overly. He is sentient, but barely. When he gets to prison, he somehow scores a woman straight from the pages of a lad's mag as his co-driver. Again, he seems neither pleased nor displeased. And then the races begin. For me, this is where the film loses its grip. You'd think that racing to the death would be pretty exciting, wouldn't you? But it's not. The reason for this is that you don't care who dies, because none of the characters seem to be alive in the first place. Still, there's a great deal of crashing and people in grave danger and people dying and the vague, nagging worry that the Joan Allen character might not be telling the truth when she tells Statham that he'll go free if he wins the race. But you know what the scariest bit is? It's when someone spits in Statham's food, which I think is pretty significant, given that this is a film about racing to the death. Screen Rant reviews Death Race, fast cars, big guns, hot chicks, as promised. If there is one thing that can be said about Jason Statham, it's that the man is an action star. You can tell is hungry for success, willing to put life and limb on the line for your entertainment. And that effort usually shows in the finished product. Death Race is no exception. Naysayers have accosted it for being a mindless video game wannabe, TNA parading, testosterone-ridden mess of a film. If there is one thing I hate, it's those whose only critical talent is stating the super obvious. And indeed, Death Race is every single thing critics have accused it of being. But for those of us capable of discerning exactly what a film is offering, all that means is that the movie delivers on what it promises, no more, no less. Whether that offer is something you want to receive depends on you. The plot, as you might imagine, is pretty simplistic. In the future, America's economy has spiraled out of control. Unemployment is rampant amongst the working class. The government's position has been weakened, leaving private corporations to call the shots. In these dire conditions, many people are forced to turn to lawlessness, causing the prison system to overflow with inmates until a corporate shark known only as Hennessy, Joan, offers up a novel idea. Transform prisoners into the new gladiators, pitting them against one another in battle for the viewing pleasure of web junkies worldwide. And so Death Race is born. Enter Jason Statham as Jensen Ames, a former badass NASCAR driver turned loving husband-father struggling to make ends meet. When an assassin murders his wife, Ames takes the fall for her death and is sent to prison. There, Hennessy makes him an offer he can't refuse. Either Ames can don the iron mask of perennial Death Race champion Frankenstein, or he can rot in prison and never see his daughter again. Obviously, Ames chooses the former. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a movie to talk about. What happens next can be summed up in 2 words: death racing. Each stock character racer, an Asian, a skinhead, a Latino, a black guy, is given a car with enough armor to be considered a tank, mounted with obscenely large and deafeningly loud guns, some defensive weapons like smoke screens and oil slicks, and a hot chick navigator to help them steer the course, find shortcuts, etc. Like any good video game, the race is held in 3 stages, and weapons can only be accessed by driving over electronic power-ups that look like manhole covers. After 15 minutes of setup, the drivers start their engines, and murder and mayhem ensue for the next 70 minutes. How Joan got stuck in this quagmire is a secret only the devil knows for sure. There is some plot involved now and again, like Ames uncovering the conspiracy behind his wife's murder and getting revenge on those involved, Frankenstein's long-standing vendetta with fellow death racer Machine Gun Joe, Tyrese Gibson, and a hackneyed third act, complete with a cringeworthy sugar-coated ending. But none of that matters. The only moments where Death Race shines is during the racing scenes, which director Paul W.S. Anderson, Resident Evil, films with an unflinching eye for fast action, old-school stuntman FX, buckets of gore, drab colors, and enough explosive eye candy absurdity to keep the ADD generation interested. The sound effects hammering your eardrums also make it hard to sleep through this movie. So, final word. Forget about plot, dialogue, character development, or the definition of the word originality. If you like fast cars, video game absurdity, and hot chicks, go to a Sunday matinee, or wait for a rainy Sunday to watch the DVD. Turn your brain volume all the way down to 0, and enjoy Death Race for the guilty pleasure that it is. And if you can't do that, well, my friend, you're probably watching movies for all the wrong reasons to begin with. Loosely based on the 1975 movie Death Race 2000, this is not quite a remake, not quite a prequel, not quite a reimagining of Death Race directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, is set in a grimy near future where private prisons offer gladiatorial-like entertainment to bloodthirsty online audiences. Terminal Island warden Hennessy, Joan, makes a killing through the lucrative webcasting of Death Race, a NASCAR to the death competition featuring imprisoned drivers willing to kill themselves or others in a bid to win their freedom. Hennessy's cash cow is threatened, however, when her star driver, the masked Frankenstein, dies from injuries suffered in a crash. Enter Jensen Ames, Statham, a former race car champ and ex-con now falsely imprisoned for the murder of his wife. Hennessy offers Ames a chance to win his freedom and reunite with his baby daughter if he secretly assumes Frankenstein's mantle. Without Frankenstein, the ratings and profits for Death Race would suffer. Armed with a tricked-out Mustang and nerves of steel, the desperate Ames must endure a 3-day contest on Hennessy's prison racetrack. The course is riddled with booby traps, the odds can be changed on a whim by Hennessy, and no one can truly be trusted. But none of this will keep Jensen Ames, aka Frankenstein, from doing what he must in order to escape this hellhole. Death Race makes no pretense to be any other kind of movie than what it is. A big, loud, and often dumb exercise in smashing cars and blowing stuff up. And as such, it's a lot of fun. A true guilty pleasure. One shouldn't like this movie. After all, it is directed by fanboy target Paul W.S. Anderson and stars Jason Statham, an all-around nice guy who has nevertheless starred in a string of forgettable action trash over the last few years. And yet, this could end up being the best film they've both made in years. The film is luckier than it probably deserves in attracting such a talented supporting cast. Joan Allen chews up the scenery as the evil warden. The amiable Pleasantville actress clearly relishes the opportunity to be bad. Also lending gravitas is Deadwood's Ian McShane, who has yet to be as well served by the big screen as he has been by the small. Along with Allen, Tyrese Gibson makes for a formidable villain. The tough guy actor deserves credit for being confident enough to play a character whose sexuality is so often called into question. Not many action stars besides The Rock would do that. Not faring as well are Natalie Martinez and Brotherhood's Jason Clarke as the movie's eye candy and henchman, respectively. Both have little to do except take orders. Of course, this movie lives or dies based on its action scenes, and in that regard, Death Race succeeds more often than not. After a near seizure-inducing introduction, the viewer settles into the frenetic style of the action scenes. Anderson employs so much shaky cam that it makes Paul Greengrass's movies look like still lifes. There are plenty of unique kills. If you ever wondered what it would look like to see a human body explode into a bloody mist, this is the movie for you. And amazing car battles, not the least of which is the set piece involving the monstrous Dreadnought. That battleship of a truck is the coolest and most amazing of all the souped-up vehicles featured. Anderson keeps the pace fast and furious, universal pun intended, with only a few jarring moments near the end that pull one out of the moment and the fun. While its namesake may be a Roger Corman movie, this Death Race is more reminiscent of last year's The Condemned, but with muscle cars instead of muscle men. Both movies were kill-crazy actioners that commented on the barbarism and voyeurism of reality entertainment and the power of the internet. Fortunately, Death Race is far better than that film and ends the summer movie season with a bang rather than a whimper. Hitchcock said a movie should play the audience like a piano. Death Race played me like a drum. It is an assault on all the senses, including common. Walking out, I had the impression I had just seen the video game and was still waiting for the movie. The time is the near future. Not that it matters. Times are bad. Unemployment is growing. A steelworker named Jensen Ames, Jason Statham, loses his job when the mill closes. He comes home to his loving wife and baby daughter. A masked man breaks in. The wife is killed. He is wounded. He is found guilty of his wife's murder, is sentenced to the dreaded terminal prison. Treasure those opening scenes of drama, however brief they may be. The movie will rarely pause again. Prisons, we learn, are now private corporations, and Terminal raises money by conducting pay-for-view internet races. Its Death Race involves prisoners driving heavily armored cars, bearing weapons such as machine guns, rocket launchers, and other inconveniences. If a prisoner wins 5 races, he gets his freedom. But why, oh why, must I describe the rules of a death race? They hardly matter, nor will I take your time to tell you why Jensen Ames is enlisted to drive as the superstar Frankenstein, who wears a mask so he could be anybody, which is the point. All of that is simply babble to set up the races. In a coordinated visual and sound attack, mighty cars roar around the prison grounds through warehouses, down docks, and so on, while blasting at each other, trying to avoid booby traps and frequently exploding. Each car is assigned gimmicks like oil slicks and napalm, which can be used only once. Did I say this played like a video game? Jensen's arch-enemy is Machine Gun Joe, Tyrese Gibson, who is gay, which the plot informs us and thereafter forgets. Jensen's chief mechanic is Coach, Ian McShane, whose oily voice provides one of the film's best qualities. And the warden of the prison is Hennessy, played by Joan Allen. Yes, that ethereal beauty, that sublime actress, that limitless talent, reduced to standing in an observation post and ordering her underlings to activate weapons. She has a line of dialogue that employs both the F word and the S word and describes a possible activity that utterly baffles me. It is a threat, shall we say, that has never been uttered before and will never be uttered again. She plays her scenes with an icy venom, which I imagine she is rehearsing to use in a chat with her agent. Exploitation movie auteur Roger Corman is one of this film's producers, but Death Race is not a remake of his Death Race 2000, 1975. That was a film about a cross-country race in which competitors scored points by how many people they ran over. 100 points for someone in a wheelchair, 70 points for the aged, 50 points for kids, and so on. Sylvester Stallone played Machine Gun Joe. David Carradine played Frankenstein, but here he only plays the voice of one of the earlier doomed Frankensteins. Let us conclude that Death Race is not a brand that guarantees quality. That it will no doubt do great at the box office is yet another sign of the decline of the national fanboy mentality. Paul Bartel's Death Race 2000, 1975 had been a brilliant satire, firing its political barbs in all direction, all the while providing a huge number of laughs, spiced with lashings of violence and mayhem. It's a terrific film, clever, witty, and silly in almost equal measure. It's not entirely clear what Paul W.S. Anderson's Death Race is meant to be other than an opportunistic jumping of a nostalgia bandwagon. Which begs the question, why would you evoke memories of a much-loved genre classic and then gut it of everything that had made it so memorable? Like John McTiernan's woeful 2002 remake of Rollerball, 1975, the film which inspired Death Race 2000 in the first place, Death Race plays down its dystopian futuristic setting. We're supposed to be in 2020, though, from what little we see of this future world outside the prison, where much of the action is set. Very little has changed all that much. Said prison is Terminal Island, possibly a tip of the hat to Stephanie Rothman's Terminal Island, 1973, a privatized prison built to deal with the rise in crime resulting from a vague collapse of the U.S. economy in 2012. The facility is ruled over by the cruel and vindictive warden Claire Hennessy, Joan Allen, and she helps to keep the masses placated by live streaming brutal gladiatorial car races between inmates who drive armored and armed cars over a 3-day festival of carnage. The people's champion is Frankenstein, initially voiced by David Carradine, who played Frankenstein in the original film, a masked inmate. His mask makes him look like a grungier take on Jason Voorhees, who, in 2020, is apparently killed by his bitter rival Machine Gun Joe, Tyrese Gibson, who doesn't have a machine gun for obvious reasons, so his nickname is a bit of a mystery here. A fact kept from the fellow prisoners and general public. Hennessy needs Frankenstein to keep up her ratings, so arranges for industrial worker, ex-con and ace driver Jensen Ames, Jason Statham, to be framed for the murder of his wife Susie, Janiah Stevens, and detained in Terminal Island. There, he's coerced into becoming the new Frankenstein and is teamed with Frankenstein's old crew, Coach Ian McShane, Gunner Jacob Vargas, and Lists Frederick Kohler, along with, on race day, a female navigator busts in from a nearby women's jail case, Natalie Martinez. During the 3 heats of the Death Race, Jensen battles fellow drivers Pachenko, Max Ryan, who he realizes was the man who really killed his wife at Hennessy's behest, Grimm, Robert Lasardo, 14K, Robin Show, Travis Colt, Justin Mater, and others, killing off his rival until only Machine Gun Joe is left alive. With the offer of a possible way off the island, Ames and Joe join forces to get one over the increasingly desperate Hennessy and make good their escape. The first thing anyone familiar with Death Race 2000 will notice is that the single most memorable aspect of that film, the one thing that even people who have never seen it seem familiar with, the idea that the transcontinental road racers score points by mowing down innocent civilians who get in their way, has been completely removed. There is some collateral damage caused by the many car crashes, but the outrageous premise of the original film is thrown in the bin, and what we're left with is a fairly standard action film, and not a particularly good one at that. Anderson has never been good with characters, relying instead on stereotypes to keep his often very flimsy scripts moving along. Here, Ames is just another Statham tough guy. It was made before he started to show off his comic talents. He's surrounded by strutting macho blockheads, and the female navigators, of who we only get to know Case, are introduced in hair-tossing slow motion. Anderson struggles to justify having navigators for a race that just goes around an enclosed track and can't think of anything interesting to do with any of the characters. Joe is explicitly identified as gay and self-mutilates using a razor blade hidden in a Bible, but none of this makes the slightest bit of difference to the film. It's just lazy character business that gets no payoff, and which is pretty much forgotten just as soon as it's introduced. Which leaves us with the action scenes, and there's not much to say about those either. Anderson succumbs to the dreaded hyperactive editing and shaky camera work, which means that it's hard to make out what's going on most of the time, badly letting down the stunt drivers and CGI artists who provided the action. The two join together fairly seamlessly. It's an ugly film too, both visually. The color is largely drained away, leaving behind muddy, industrial sheen. And sonically, Paul Haslinger's score is very hit and miss, and the dialogue ranges from the inane to the truly appalling. Several of the cast look like they'd realized a bit too late what a terrible mistake they'd made in signing up for this. What on earth did McShane and Allen think they were getting into? They give it all they've got, but it all feels a bit beneath them. At least they got a credit, which is more than can be said for most of the creators of the original film. Producer Roger Corman shares an executive producer credit, but you'll search in vain for any recognition of the work of Bart Tell, screenwriters Robert Tom and Charles B. Griffith, or author Ib Melchior, writer of the short story The Racer, on which it had been based. Maybe they got off lightly. The transcontinental road race is here reduced to a game of heavily armed bumper cars played by swaggering, humorless lunkheads, removing everything that was fun and memorable about the original, to the point where one wonders why they didn't just come up something of their own instead. It feels more like The Running Man 1987 than Death Race 2000, and that can't be a good thing at all. But the film must have found an audience, as follow-ups were soon gathering dust on the shelves of video rental shop. Death Race 2, 2010, and Death Race 3. Inferno, 2013, were prequels directed by Roel Rainé, with some writing and production input. Anderson, while Death Race Anarchy 2018 is a proper sequel again with writing contributions from Anderson. By the time the latter had come out, Corman had contributed his own direct sequel to the original, the equally miserable Death Race 2017, directed by G.J. Echternkamp. Whether by coincidence or design, the 3-week period from August 20th through September 10th has been dominated over the last 5 years by Jason Statham. In 2004, there was Cellular. In 2005, there was Transporter 2. The 2006 entry was Crank, followed by War in 2007. Now, for 2008, Statham has Death Race, which delivers pretty much what one might expect from a movie of that name: cars and carnage. Statham's films never promise to be something they're not, or offer something they don't provide. Death Race is not an exception. Paul W.S. Anderson's The Alien vs. Predator guy creation is weak when it comes to things like plot, character, and acting, but it's very good at provoking visceral reactions, and that's largely what the picture's audience will be in multiplexes for. It's a little surprising to find an actress of Joan Allen's stature in an exploitation flick like this. For Statham, this is his bread and butter, but Allen usually goes for more upscale fare. One can only assume that she enjoyed playing the bitch in The Bourne Supremacy, The Bourne Ultimatum, and wanted a chance to refine her villainous skills. Here, she's got the Ice Queen personality down to a T. Cool, regal, and ready to slip in the knife and twist it for all it's worth. She's a badass in skirt and heels, the kind of woman viewers love to hate. Her profane diatribe has to be heard to be believed. The premise, borrowed liberally from the 1975 Roger Corman movie Death Race 2000, is simple. The year is 2012, and gladiatorial sports are all the rage online. The prisoners of Terminal Island, lorded over by Warden Hennessy Allen, participate in the death race, where the winner takes a step toward freedom. Win 5 races to earn a get-out-of-jail-free card, and the losers escape in a body bag, if there's enough left of them to zip up. The death race's most famous participant, Frankenstein, has met an untimely end at the hands of Machine Gun Joe, Tyrese Gibson. But that doesn't stop Hennessy from bringing back the beloved Frank for another race. To that end, she frames Jensen Ames' Statham, a former professional racer, for the murder of his wife and makes him an offer he can't refuse. Play the part of Frank, win the death race, and go free. Unfortunately, Jensen finds out Hennessy was behind his wife's death, and revenge becomes a more important priority for him than freedom. His allies include Case, Natalie Martinez, his smoking hot navigator, and coach, Ian McShane, the leader of his pit crew. As one would expect from a long race, there are plenty of mini-climaxes as Jensen faces off and defeats his opponents. Death Race's actual climax is a little different than what one might expect from the beginning of the movie, although it is telegraphed surprisingly early. The ending is perfunctory and doesn't offer the level of hands-on satisfaction that some might desire. While the epilogue certainly wraps things up, it does a better job of raising questions than answering them. Then again, there's little about Death Race's screenplay that even the most charitable viewer would label as airtight. Logic was not one of the characteristics Anderson worried about when assembling this movie. This is the Fast and the Furious, or Speed Racer on steroids, although it is more about violence and gore than cars. None of the vehicles are slick and sleek. They're armed and armored tanks, with jets that spew smoke, oil, and napalm, and fully operational machine guns mounted on hoods and roofs. The race course is modeled after a video game. As the drivers buzz around the track, smashing into other cars, there are power-ups to hit. The first car to glide over these power-ups can have its weapons activated or cause a deadly obstacle to spring up in the middle of the road in front of an opponent. Death Race makes a few weak attempts at satire, emphasizing how bloodthirsty the human race is, paying $99 a round to watch human beings get blown up and shredded. It's not a unique idea, having provided the backstory for more than one action movie, the most famous of which may be Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Running Man. Heavy-handed satirical elements represent nothing more than frosting on the blood-soaked, action-packed cake, however. This movie is about mayhem on wheels, tough guys viewers can root for, and villains whose comeuppances audiences crave. That's what Death Race is all about, and for what it is, it does a solid job. Back when I was a kid, I had a mate called Peter, and we used to spend hours drawing what we called futuristic war machines, basically cars laden with spikes, turbo boosters, and machine guns. Years later, Paul W.S. Anderson, Mortal Kombat, would turn this into a movie starring Jason Statham, Hummingbird, and if I'm honest, I kinda liked it. In the near future, the American economy has collapsed. Unemployment is at an all-time high, and the hungering masses at reaching critical mass. Crime is through the roof, and with the justice system unable to cope with the influx of fresh prisoners, it outsources all prisons to private institutions. No longer under the watchful eye of Uncle Sam, they start exploiting the prisoners by broadcasting live fights to the death at a tidy little premium. But that doesn't keep the public satiated for long. No, apparently the bored, unemployed masses want even crazier shit. Death Race is born. Prisoners get to race heavily armored vehicles against each other for the viewing pleasure of millions at home for a low cost of $100 per race or $250 per event. Each race consists of 3 events. The first 2 are designed to whittle down the competition, to kill off the minor characters and get the juices flowing. The final race determines the winner. Win 5 death races in a row, and you're granted your freedom. The first action we get a taste of is the final of one such race. The mask-wearing Frankenstein and his beautiful navigator Case, Natalie Martinez, end of watch, are leading, but in some serious trouble. They're being pursued by the monstrous Machine Gun Joe, Tyrese Gibson Transformers, and a bunch of other lesser drivers. With all of his defenses, napalm, smoke, oil, mysteriously not working, he's no choice but to drop the tombstone, the huge armor plate that protects the rear of his car. This smashes into Joe but doesn't incapacitate him. With the finish line in sight, Frank knows he's in the shit. Case bails out while Joe's final bazooka shot blasts Frank over the line. Frank wins. But at what cost? Elsewhere, Jensen Ames, Statham, is working his last day at the steel mill for some chump change. When the laid-off workers start getting antsy over their light last paycheck, the SWAT teams are called in and a riot ensues. Luckily, Ames escapes and finds his way home on the bus. See, he doesn't have a license anymore. As a former NASCAR driver and ex-con, he had it revoked after doing some naughty boy getaway driving or something. His nice wife didn't marry him for his career prospects, though. She had her eye on his other assets. She's kept him on the straight and narrow, and with the birth of his daughter Piper, he's doubling down to get a job and keep his family happy. It all goes to shit, though, when he's tranquilized by a masked and wrist-tagged assailant. He awakens to find a knife in his hand and his wife stabbed to death next to him. Unfortunately for him, somebody also called the cops. 6 months later, he's got a guilty verdict, and he's on another bus, this time to Terminal Island, the home of the death race. Here's he's introduced to the head screw, guard Ulrich, Jason Clarke, Zero Dark 30, a sadistic bastard who combs his hair to the side like a gimp. He's the right-hand man of the stone-cold warden of Terminal Island, Claire Hennessy, Joan Allen face off. She makes Ames an offer he can't refuse. Take up the mask of dead Frankenstein and do the race. Ratings have been slumping since Frank went out and she's got bills to pay. No one knows he's dead, not even the shareholders. If he wins, he goes free. If he loses or refuses, no more daddy-daughter days down at the steel mill. Ultimately, Ames agrees and he's introduced to his pit crew. You've got Coach, Ian McShane, John Wick, an institutionalized ex-con who is in charge of the crew. Next, you've got Lists, who's blatantly on the learning difficulty spectrum. Probably not a good poster child for disabled people in movies, as he's a wuss who murdered his mother. He's nice enough, though. Finally, you have badass mechanic Gunner. Wearing the battered mask of Frankenstein, no one realizes a switch has been made. Not even the other drivers notice. Joe is just pissed he seemingly survived the last race. The mask looks really cool. It's got an iconic look to it. Sadly, Ames takes it off when he gets in the car. Seems that the glass is mirrored. I suppose Statham wanted to get his mug out a bit more often. Each team has their own car with its own unique brand of design and weaponry. Frank's monster is a Ford Mustang covered in rough-welded reinforcements, armor, and machine guns. Joe rides a huge Dodge Ram truck, a black beast rippling with guns, bazookas, and an immense cow catcher at the front. Each vehicle is really uniquely designed, specific to the character of each driver, and the level of production is one of the great strengths of this movie. It's really impressive the detail that each has. It made my old artistic bones quiver. Sadly, the chunk of change they spent on each car is wasted due to the shoddy cinematography. It's very much in a Fast and Furious, jagged camera, fast edit, lots of shots of gear-changing style. You never linger for very long on any of the vehicles or any of the race, so there's little appreciation in regards the physical nature of each. The cutting is so fast that you could mistake any of the stunts for CGI and vice versa, and it overall looks like a mess. It's no carefully choreographed masterpiece like Mad Max Fury Road, where we get full-on master shots of carnage and destruction, and it suffers for it massively. Another dumb element is the Mario Kart-like bonus zones each guy has to drive over. For the first lap of each race, they have no weapons or defenses. During the second lap, a driver can activate their shit by driving over a special section of the road. Sword for guns, shield for defenses, a skull for a raised spike that spells insta-death for the poor bastard who drives over it. It's kind of silly, but explains why the cars are even driving in the first place. Surely with guns live from the beginning, you'd be better off starting at the back and shooting your way forward. Anyway, Ames Frank survives the first race. A few others aren't so lucky. In fact, he leads for the majority of event, but crashes out into last place when he loses concentration. The Aryan Brotherhood's driver Slovo Pachenko, Max Ryan, Rage, shoots him a salute like the guy who killed his wife. That son of a bitch. But how did he get out? Well, Hennessy needed a badass driver to replace the old Frank, right? She was actually the one who masterminded the entire thing. She has to pay. First things first, though, Pachenko is next on Ames' shit list. But there's also the growing suspicion that Case might not be playing straight with him, too. And what is Hennessy cooking up in that restricted area of the pit that no one can see? Surely that can't be good. Death Race, shot in 2008, is a remake of Death Race 2000, originally made in 1975. Confusing? The original was made by B-movie legend Roger Corman and starred David Carradine, Kill Bill, as Frank. He was being pursued by another Machine Gun Joe, this time played by a pre-Rocky fame Sylvester Stallone, escape plan. One of the chief differences is that Carradine is not an ex-con, but a government-trained driver who is specially selected as a replacement to the last Frankenstein. The continued presence of Frankenstein, regardless of the injuries he sustained or the wrecks he got into, and the ensuing public perception of him, proved to be a powerful weapon for the government, whom control the race. Carradine, aware that his days are numbered, has his own plan to kill the president and ride off into the sunset. While a bit shoddy around the edges, the original remains quite a seminal movie, with insane stunt work, killing, and gallows black humor. While stylistically superior, the 2008 remake pays respect to the original chiefly by featuring the voice of David Carradine at the beginning as the original Frank. Both the original and the remade version share themes from another dystopian sports film, Rollerball. Made in the same year as Death Race 2000, Rollerball features James Cain, a racer, as Jonathan E., a player for the Houston Rollerball team. Rollerball is a game where opposing teams have to chase a metal ball around a caged velodrome. Using force, they have to collect the ball and post it in the opposition's goal. It's an incredibly brutal game, which replaces all sports and war in the near future. It's heavily controlled by the shadowy government, and when Jonathan and a number of his teammates start becoming famous, the chief string pullers grow fearful. The notion of individuality and hope is something they want to avoid, so they begin to tamper with each subsequent game in an effort to destroy Jonathan E. While the social commentary is a bit thin on the ground in Death Race, you can draw obvious parallels with Rollerball. It certainly also draws on a lot of real-life fears in regards to the fragile economy and the increased availability of online violence. I'm a huge action movie and UFC fan, so I see no problem in this. We humans are a bunch of bloodthirsty bastards after all. But they're now offering clemency to prisoners in Thailand whom learn to become Muay Thai fighters. How long is it before some dodgy country whom doesn't take human rights too seriously starts doing their own death race? Hell, I'd probably even watch it. I wouldn't pay those prices, though. Fuck that. I'd just BitTorrent that shit. Statham, as leading man, kicks ass when it needs to be kicked, looks like a hard bastard, and Cockney banters his way through the script. People criticize Statham for pretty much playing the same role the same way from film to film. He even looks the same in each movie. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You never saw Bruce Lee in a wig, did you? The backstory for all the other characters is reduced to a single line of dialogue, but they're all likable enough. McShane excels as the caring mentor type and has some of the better one-liners. There's nothing like some of the badass shit on Running Man that he gets to say, but there's stuff like, "I love this game," "Nobody fucks with my car," or Now that's entertainment. Each of the drivers having sexy female navigators did seem a bit outdated in this gender-sensitive time. They're shipped in from a lady prison upstate. I guess if this film was made now, Terminal Island would be a co-ed prison. Some of the drivers would probably be female, and their co-pilots would likely be gender-neutral people wearing amorphous bodysuits and having nondescript buzz-cut hairdos, as is our current culture. Case is actually capably played by Martinez. There's only a few moments where the camera truly lingers on her body. For the rest of the film, she's a decent foil to Statham. I like the role she plays in their escape at the end, no spoilers, especially after it's revealed she was originally planted by Hennessy to sabotage Frank in the last race. This is contrasted by Machine Gun Joe's all-male navigator entourage. He uses men because they seldom survive from race to race. The running joke of them all dying in absurd ways actually becomes pretty funny. I got a genuine chuckle out of Tyrese being increasingly shocked he isn't injured too after they're shot, crushed, dismembered, etc. Traditionally, Joan Allen plays suit-wearing corporate women really well. Here, she really ramps up the evil factor. Spider-like, she's as calculating as she was in the Bourne films, but clearly lacking that underlying sense of human decency. She wants to keep the race running and the money pouring in. But most importantly, she needs Frankenstein to lose, spectacularly. The notion that their freedom can be won is necessary to keep the prisoners interested. The rub is that she really can't let some murderous bastard go free. For what? Winning some dumb race. No, her only recourse is to humiliate them. Her character doesn't like foul language, backed up by physical violence from the sadly one-note Jason Clarke, but you know by the end that she's going to be swearing the house down when her plans go to hell. I'm not a fan of Paul W.S. Anderson as a director. Mortal Kombat notwithstanding, most of his films are dross. However, as he makes popular dreck with pre-established fan bases like the Alien vs. Predator and Resident Evil movies, zounds of idiots still line up to go see his shit. So he's successful. But I'm going to give him Death Race. Initially, the jarring cinematography put me off, and there are some needless action moments like the SWAT team riot at the beginning. Ignoring that, the simple enough premise is decently executed. The production design is strong, as is the albeit simplistic characterization. It can't match the likes of Mad Max in terms of quality or visceral entertainment, but it's a step up from the likes of Smokey and the Bandit or the Cannonball Run. And I like those two movies. There's something to be said for a movie that knows exactly what it is and then whacks that knowledge home like a rusty pipe in the face. Case in point, Death Race. A delectable bit of B-movie savagery that actually does feature pipe melees, among much other kicky and punchy and impaled by a metal spiky ultra-violence. The premise, updated from the 1975 cult classic Death Race 2000, is simple, sick, and satisfying. In the year 2012, in response to the collapsing American economy, shady corporations have taken over the prison system and reap huge profits by staging gladiatorial pay-per-view contests among the prisoners. Out on Terminal Island, where the worst of the worst participate in the wildly popular Death Race showdown, an Ice Queen warden named Hennessy, Joan Allen, slumming with style, faces a crisis. Her star driver, a mask-wearing psychopath named Frankenstein, has just met his maker at the tip of a missile. In a bid to maximize ratings, Hennessy hatches a plot to replace Frankenstein with Jensen Ames, Jason Statham, a former racing champ. Framed for the murder of his wife and shuffled off to Terminal Island, fury mounting and muscles rippling, Jensen is pressed into fending off a grimy assortment of gearhead sociopaths with the promise that if he wins the race, he's free to go. Needless to say, things are about to blow up, quite literally, in everyone's face. And how they blow. Directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, a low-rent genre artisan who seems to have figured out a thing or two since staging Alien vs. Predator, or at least found a better crew to back him up. Death Race is a supercharged junkyard apocalypse powered by an unabashed relish for brutal comeuppance and a flair for delirious vehicular mayhem. Extended over 3 increasingly frantic, vividly murderous rounds, the Death Race itself is a tour de force of no-nonsense neo-grindhouse. Anchored by the ever-dependable Mr. Statham and his gruff, buff stoicism, the movie is legitimately greasy, authentically nasty, with a good old-fashioned sense of laying waste to everything in sight, including the shallow philosophizing and computer-generated fakery that have overrun the summer blockbuster. No fancy talk here, just solid monosyllabic obscenities. No flights of digital fancy, just souped-up monster cars flipping end over end in a napalm blaze and crashing in a crunch of flaming metal. Ouch. It's a common fact that when anyone feels the need to defend the patchy career of Paul W.S. Anderson, they'll slap a mention of Event Horizon on the table with all the smug confidence of a reverse Uno card, and then usually follow it up with a Mortal Kombat was pretty cool. They're right, of course, as even a stopped clock is right twice a day. But one title from Anderson's filmography that almost never gets mentioned is his remake of Roger Corman's 1975 engine-revving satire, Death Race 2000. A movie that saw Sylvester Stallone take on David Carradine in a dystopian future so camp, you'd think they'd be driving tents. Giving everything a typically moody millennial makeover, Anderson took a similar route taken by Zack Snyder when he retooled George Romero's similarly satirical Dawn of the Dead by removing a vast amount of social commentary and focusing on a video game-style pace that brings maximum pain with minimum subtlety. Thanks to the collapse of the U.S. economy in 2012, I love it when dystopia movies pass their sell-by date. The skyrocketing crime rate has led to prisons becoming privatized, with some finding as many shifty ways of subsidizing their income by broadcasting death matches to a paying audience. One such prison is Terminal Island, whose warden, the glacial, Thatcher-esque Claire Hennessy, has created Death Race. A lethal game that sees heavily armed automobiles tearing each other to shreds as they hurtle around a track that's become insanely successful thanks to fan-favorite racer, the Masked Frankenstein. However, there's a slight problem as the mysterious driver kind of got himself killed during his last race due to the ongoing grudge match with fellow competitor Machine Gun Joe. As luck would have it, one of Terminal Island's brand new residents is Jensen Ames, an ex-driver come industrial worker who has been framed for the murder of his wife, and Hennessy is immediately on him to fill Frankenstein's mask, holding a ticket to freedom and his infant daughter as leverage. Agreeing, Ames is quickly introduced to Frankenstein's eccentric racing crew, led by the wizened lifer, Coach, and his female co-passenger Case. Busty, Latinx sidekicks are great for ratings, unsurprisingly, and before he knows it, Ames is knee-deep in bullets and twisted metal as Machine Gun Joe, unaware that the real Frankenstein is actually dead, is eager to renew their feud. However, after making it through the first race relatively unscathed, Ames starts to have suspicions that his frame job happened in order to specifically get him behind bars with his butt planted in Frankenstein's old bucket seat. Can he avoid more explosive T-bones than a petrol-soaked steakhouse in order to prove his innocence? There are many entertaining descriptions that can be leveled at Anderson's version of the Corman cult classic. The personal favorite I came up with was Mad Max Fury Road meets Mario Kart. But the whole dropping of the original concept of a cross-country race, where you get points for any civilians caught in the crossfire, in favor of a more contained prison film, means that it actually feels more like a rusty petrolhead reboot of The Longest Yard. Amazingly, it almost works really well, as Anderson is seemingly far more interested with riffing on virtually every single lethal game show movie except Death Race 2000, with the main influence ironically being the endless, rust-flecked warehouses from 1987 Schwarzenegger Murderfest, The Running Man. Actually, if you could take Anderson, stuff him in a time machine and send him back to the 80s to make action movies, that probably would have been the perfect period for him to stretch his action muscles because, for a director infamous for his over-reliance on digital enhancements, the car chases are viciously real. Yep, it's no real surprises that the best moments of this violent racing movie is the violent races, and the minimal reliance on computer-powered trickery means there's plenty of moments where you ball your fists and mindlessly howl at the screen whenever the next roaring vehicle, and its screaming occupants is impressively turned into a twisted fireball on wheels. Also, Anderson beings his highly publicized love of video game culture by having literal power-ups scattered around the track for Carr to drive over to activate their offensive or defensive capabilities. No blue tortoiseshell, though, I'm afraid. Alan Tyrese Gibson makes for a formidable villain. The tough guy actor deserves credit for being confident enough to play a character whose sexuality is so often called into question. Not many action stars besides The Rock would da that not faring as well are Natalie Martinez and Brotherhood's Jason Clarke as the movie's eye candy and henchman respectively. Both have little to do except take orders, of course. This movie lives Zordy's based on its action scenes, and in that regard, Death Races succeeds more often than not. After a near-seizure-inducing introduction, the viewer settles into the frenetic style of the action scenes. Anderson employs so much shaky cam that it makes Paul Greengrass movies look like still lives. There are plenty of unique kills. If you ever wondered what it would look like to see a human body explode into a bloody mist, this is the movie for you, and amazing car battles. Not the least of which is the set piece involving the monstrous Dredden that battleship of a truck is the coolest and most amazing of all the souped-up vehicles featured. Anderson keeps the pace, fast and furious universal pun intended, with only a, near the end, that pull one out of the moment, and the fun while its namesake, maybe a Roger Corman movie. This Death Race is more reminiscent of last year's The Condemned, but with muscle cars instead of muscle men. Both movies were kill crazy actioners that commented on the barbarism and voyeurism of reality entertainment and the power of the internet. Fortunately, Death Race is far better than that film and ends the summer movie season with a bang rather than a whimper after being framed for the murder of his wife, ex-racer Jensen Ames. Jason Statham is forced by a corrupt prison warden Joan Allen to compete in the Savage Death Race, a 3-day event that has become a pay-per-view phenomenon. Contestants, all of them, prisoners are encouraged to kill or M opponents, and each car is heavily loaded with various weapons that can be activated only by driving over specific markers. If a prisoner wins enough races, he gets a pardon. I don't really know what to make of Death Race. While I'm familiar with the original film Death Race 2000, I've always felt that it was a little overpraised, so I was not too upset when I found out the film was going to be remade. Then I found out Paul W. Anderson had been signed to direct. Anderson is one of those filmmakers that absolutely infuriate me. He's never made a particularly good film, although Event Horizon was decent, but studios just keep throwing money at them. What pisses me off the most about this guy is that unlike a hack like Yuao, Anderson actually has some talent. No matter how bad some of his films may be, they're never offensively bad, just hopelessly mediocre. This mediocrity is on full display in Death Race, which is too bad because it could have easily rocked. For one thing, the cast is absolutely perfect. Jason Statham was born to do these kinds of roles, and once again, he delivers, whether behind a wheel or fighting hand-tow. And Statham is probably one of the most exciting action heroes to come along in years, while he has definitely made his share of stinkers in the name of the King wore when given the right vehicle crank snatched the bank job. The transporter, he's hard to beat. Supporting Statham is Ian McShane, one of the best character actors out there. His work on Deadwood is beyond incredible, and he steals every scene he's in. Joan Allen, while slumming somewhat, is fine as the villainous warden, although I think someone like Sigourney Weaver might have been a little more convincing in the role. Also worth mentioning is Natalie Martinez as Statham's sexy navigator. Case, she's absolutely smoking hot, and I expect to see her around a lot over the next few years. Where Death Race goes wrong is in the action scenes. There's way too much quick cutting, and the races scenes were not adrenaline pumping at all. There's absolutely no sense of scope, and everything seems totally fake due to overly extravagant special effects. They should have really stripped down the action scenes instead of pumping them up to the point that they seem like cutscenes from a video game. The only really good action scene is when Statham and Tyrese Gibson take on a heavily armed truck, which I must admit was pretty damn cool, although not a patch on the ass of the big chase in the Road Warrior. This brings me to my other big problem with the film, Tyrese's character, Machine Gun Joe. I thought Tyrese rocked in this film up until the final act, where his character is horribly mishandled, ruining the rest of the film. I don't want to give too much away, but what happens in these scenes does not mesh at all with the rest of the film and reeks of hasty last-minute script doctoring. I hesitate to blame Tyrese, as he's good throughout, but he's really let down by the script towards the end. This leads me to my single biggest problem with the film. The absolutely dreadful ending. For some reason, Anderson and company tack on this absolutely ridiculous epilogue, which completely neuters the film, which had been pretty hardcore to this point, and ends it on a terrible note. I can't believe this chicken epilogue was left in a sit just about ruins the film despite its many flaws. I did somewhat enjoy Death Race. Sure, it's mediocre, but it's nowhere near as badass some critics are saying us. Anderson has been trying to bring his remake of Death Race 2000 to the big screen for 13 years, during which time much has changed. For the British director, notably, he stopped being plain old Paul Anderson and sprouted initials are sort of that other Paul Anderson running around directing the odd masterpiece here and there and somewhere along the way PW's. As nobody calls him, wasted the promise he showed in his early flicks to allow in a state of arrested development, pumping out geek wish-fulfillment flicks based on video games and comic books. At first glance, Death Race is another one of those projects or make come adolescent fantasy, but unlike, say, Resident Evil and Alien vs. Predator, Anderson delivers an unashamedly brutal actioner that pushes all the right guys flick buttons, combining hot chick shotter cars, enormous guns, and Joan Allen. Saying the word coxer into a preposterous but ready-made guilty pleasure, the original Death Race was a satirical schlockfest in which David Carradine and a young Sylvester Stallone raced across America, mowing down pedestrians for points. Anderson actually pitches this movie as a prequel of sorts, exploring the origins of Frankenstein, Stammin' the Cadnerole, and Machine Gun Joe Tyrese, following Stallone and indeed the concept of the Death Race itself by transplanting the action from the open road to a dank maximum security prison run by Allen's warden. Hennessy, a ball-busting cross between a step-forward wife and Maggie Thatcher Anderson, combines prison movie, the camshaft redemption, anyone with revenge flick, and while it's one-dimensional, overcrowded with walking cliches, all hail Ian McShane. Bringing a bedraggled charm to the role of kindly old lag and bereft of the original satire, the local change allows Anderson to shift the focus of the event from a meandering affair to a concise 3-lap race during which drivers unleash guns, oil, and even napalm upon their rivals. It's in the race sequences that Anderson shows why he was willing to wait so long to make the movie. The adherence to practical stunts results in some impressive chases, punctuated by gunfire, fireballs, rolls, and spectacular collisions. They're also extraordinarily violent as drivers, and they're gratuitously female. Navigators are splattered at 70 mph, ripped to shreds by gunfire or buzzsaws, or atomized by huge explosions. It's not called Death Race for nothing, but Anderson's Bovie bombast wouldn't work nearly as well without its leading man who's utterly at home with this sort of material in a role that had originally been earmarked for producer Tom Cruise. State handles the driving and punching with ease while more than holding his own in the acting stakes, growling his lines at Allen as if he just set fire to the script and eaten the ashes. Statham has threatened to become a genuine lead man for a while now. He is the making of Death Race. Seatbelt check, adrenaline check, testosterone check, on your ready race. This is a movie primarily targeted at the guys in the audience, as the trailers certainly would infer. However, that's not to say that the ladies can't enjoy Death Race as well. If some nerdy research scientist were to develop the quintessential movie for the average guy, this is probably close to what they hop. Women biggins in the car stew and some badass dudes kicking the crap out of each other. What more could you ask for? Jason STM plays Jensen as is in this remake of the 1975 classic from producer Roger Corman Amos. Is a former driver who is framed for killing his wife and ends up in prison, only to discover he's being forced into driving as the legendary Frankenstein in the infamous Death Race. The Death Race is the Warden Hennessy Joan Allen baby, which pits the most violent offenders against each other. In an automobile race to the death, the cars are retrofitted with some extreme armor, massive machine guns, and napalm. Each driver gets a navigator who happens to be a scorching hot female inmate from the sister penitentiary. The year is 2012, and the economy is kaput. Unemployment is through the roof, and crime is out of control. So the government placed the correctional facilities into the hands of major corporations who run them for profit, hence the live pay-per-view streams of the death races that make Hennessy her green. Ames eventually learns about the conspiracy behind the race and does what Statham does best, getting revenge and kicking ass in the process. As for the races themselves, it's pure, unadulterated, masculine gearhead fun. Ames finds himself up against the likes of the Grim Reaper, Robert Lode Fortenke, Robin Show, Pachenko, Max Ryan, and Frankenstein's arch nemesis, Machine Gun Joe Tyrese Gibson. H. Driver has his own pit crew, and as this is managed by Coach Ian McShane. McShane is great in Death Race and makes Memphis Deadwood. As for the story, well, there is some story despite it being an action movie. However, I'm not entirely sure. Director Paul W.S. Anderson, Resident Evil, will be able to continue taking full story and writing credit at. Shedda's in the opening titles. Apparently, writer Adam Stone has filed a copyright infringement lawsuit against Anderson, stating the movie is based on a script he pitched to the filmmakers and was rejected, but they allegedly kept a copy of the script. So see it while you can. I just saw Death Race, and I still resurrect the 1975 cult classic Death Race. The current version is missing the point system of the original points for killing pedestrians, but does have action superstar Jason Statham, Transporter as ex-race car driver Jensen. Ace is framed for his wife's murder and sent away to prison, and his only hope is to survive. Not when Survive the Death Race. The year is 2012. The country's economy is in the toilet. Unemployment and crime are through the roof. Corporations run the prisons to stem overcrowding. They institute battles to the death and televise them for profit. Then comes a whacked-out woman, Warden Hennessy Joan Allen of Terminal Island Prison, with the hit of them all. She institutes a 3-part, 3-day race with only one goal. Death Race goes for $250 on satellite PPV like NASCAR has its Celebrity Convicts, Machine Gun Joe, Tyrese Gibson, Grim Robert Lardo, and Fanfa Frankenstein. Frankenstein disfigured from numerous races is forced to wear a mask, but as the winningest racer in the prison Machine Gun, Joe has a need of a new Navigator SL co-pilot every race because they just can't stay alive to see the finish line. You are probably asking yourself, why do they do it? 3 reasons. 1, it's an adrenaline-filled rush. 2, if you Y5 races, you're paroled. 3, we wouldn't have a film. Without the race, freedom is a powerful carrot to dangle in front of these felons. But Hennessy isn't about to lose her cash cow. Death Race earns millions, and the people love Frankenstein. Unfortunately, Frankenstein is killed in an accident, not really when he is about to win his 5th race and get out, See, no one ever wins. 5 races after 4 wins, there is some kind of mishap or vehicle error and you lose or die, whatever. Warden Hennessy prefers. Enter Jensen Ace S. Stam, framed for murdering his wife, his infant daughter, taken away and put into foster care. Ames is looking at a life sentence on Terminal Island, unknowingly handpicked by Hennessy to replace Frankenstein in the race. Ames just has to win 1 race and he is free. Remember, Frankenstein wears a mask and he has won 4 races already. Ames agrees and he is introduced to the car crew. A racer is only as good as his pit crew. This is especially true in the Death Race. Coach Ian McShane heads the crew, a freeman that can't identify with society, so he chooses to live in the prison. AK Idiot lists and gunner round. Out the team that keeps Frankenstein on the road. The nicest thing about this race is every driver navigator except for Machine Gun. He plays for the other team. If you get my drift, is an inmates from the women's facility on the other side of town. It's like the Pussycat Dolls do San Quentin, so Ames must win. The race, avoid being killed by the other drivers. Hand out his own amount of whoop-ass without being double-crossed and killed by Warden Hennessy, plus win over Chase Natalie Martinez, his shifty co-pilot, so he can get off the island and get his daughter back. That's a piece of cake. Death Race is packed with car crashes, explosions, and a school bus-style tank from hell. There are more bullets flying than on the beach in Saving Private R.I. There are body parts flying everywhere. You may want to bring a paper bag along with you, depending on what type of moviegoer you or the bag will be needed. If you are a little queasy at the sign of blood, you may be carrying out your dinner in it, or if you get into this film and will need the bag to catch your breath after this fast-paced thrill ride. A lot of people have hated on Paul W.S. Anderson in the past, looking back over his filmography. The only real miss I can find is Alien vs. Predator, I refuse to refer to. That film is AP. Since Mortal Kombat in '95, Anderson has made mindless action films that are genuinely entertaining. Okay, maybe. Soldier was more brainless than exciting, but Event Horizon is an almost great sci-fi horror flick, and Resident Evil is one of the better video game adaptations out there. Death Race is Anderson's latest endeavor, and like Anderson's greatest hits, this one is balls-to-the-wall excitement. Death Race is a remake of Roger Corman's 1975 cult classic Death Race 2000. In that film, bloodthirsty contestants went on a cross-country race where running down innocent pedestrians earned you points in. Anderson's retelling, the contestants are lifers in a maximum security prison. And the cross-country race is secluded to the tracks that run throughout an island prison instead of one long race. The death race in the new film is a series of 3 races. If a prisoner wins 5 death races, he wins a full pardon. The whole thing is broadcast by a streaming video, and it has become more popular than the Super Bowl. Like the original, each car is manufactured with custom weapons and armor, making the death race essentially just that, a race to the death. Most races end with only one man standing. Jason Statham plays Jensen Ames, a steelworker, who is just trying to provide for his wife and child. His wife is murdered. Ames is framed for the crime, and he is given a lifetime sentence. The death. Race's biggest icon is a mask-wearing prisoner who goes by the name of Frankenstein. Frankenstein has won 4 death races, but is killed before winning his 5th due to the popularity of the character. The warden of the prison and entrepreneur of the entire death race extravaganza, Hennessy, played by Joan Allen, decides to put the Frankenstein mask on Ames, thus forcing the Frankenstein persona to live on. Death Race is one badass film. When gauging mindless action movies, its worth is measured by what the film appears to be made of. Is it made of plastic, or is it made of metal? Death Race is made of metal, through and through. The stunts and action scenes were mostly done using practical effects. None of that overtly fake CGI crap, and the special effect in this film look great when cars flip up in the air or crash into a wall. They look real when vehicles blow up. The flames and flying debris are all real. All of this adds to the genuine excitement the film generates. Statham has unofficially taken the moniker of this generation's action star with a vengeance. Everything the guy does is awesome. Unlike Dwayne Johnson, he doesn't aspire to be anything besides a great action star. Unlike Vin Diesel, he knows how to pick the right parts to keep hold of that title. Joan Allen is fine as the film's ultimate villain, even though it seems she agreed to the film for a big fat paycheck. Ian McShane, who plays Frankenstein's P crew chief, has taken his role in Deadwood and turned playing that part into a lifelong career, and it never gets old. Tyrese Gibson plays Machine Gun Joe, Frankenstein's arch-rival in the death race. He's good, but I couldn't help but think how great it would have been to see Sylvester Stallone reprise the role from Corman's original Natal Eyes. Martinez plays Case Frankenstein, Navigator, who doesn't really do anything but look good. She does that very well, so there are no complaints there. The real stars of the film, however, are the action scenes. The first 2 stages of the death race are astounding. There are bloody explosions and gory car crashes left and right. Your eyes never move away from the action, and you really want more when that third leg kicks in. The final stage isn't as exciting as the first 2. The real climax of the film comes at the end of the second stage, when a couple of cars must deal with Hennessy's new favorite toy. I won't spoil what that is, but it's surprising to say the least. Even after the final stage of the competition, when the film really deals into its climax, you don't feel the same level of excitement you did earlier in the film. It is unfortunate, but the film tops out around the 60-minute mark and never fully recovers besides that death. Race is exactly what it sets out to be, a no-frills, bona fide roller coaster of an action flick. Anderson is staying on top of the mindless action filmmaker heap Statham is staying on top of the action star. Heap Death Race is pure awesomeness. Extra information. I've not seen the previous Death Race movies, but I know that the 2008 movie connects to them somehow. The script is very generic and straightforward in plot, and forgettable. It takes place in some futuristic dystopia, and you could say that much of the scenarios of prisoners taking part in a death race is a play on reality TV. Despite this, the setting is underdeveloped and not really explored or elaborated on that much, while the themes aren't anything special. Doesn't feel like it's aiming for that. Death Race does benefit from its simplistic plot. This is one of Paul W.S. Anderson's most video gamey films, and that's saying a lot, considering that he has made movies based on Mortal Kombat, Monster Hunter, and Resident Evil. It's definitely an absurd movie, from the over-the-top action to the really silly dialogue, but it kind of works in a schlocky B-level exploitation flick way. The movie also benefits from some solid performances. Jason Statham works well in the lead role and delivers a good performance. He particularly shines when he gets to race cars and have fight scenes. Tyrese Gibson plays a surprisingly less comedic role as a maniacal prisoner and one of the notable competitors in the death races. And Ian McShane, as usual, adds a lot in his screen time. Joan Allen is the main villain as the warden of the prison. She chaws the scenery, especially when she goes off the rails in the third act. Additionally, Jason Clarke is effective in a supporting villain role overall. I thought that Paul W.S. Anderson's direction worked well at delivering a somewhat B-level exploitation movie. The action scenes, mostly the car racing scenes, are well directed. It is well choreographed and kept interesting, especially with how creative they get with the scenarios. The stunts and effects are great too, relying more on the practical stuff than CGI. There's a lot of glorious carnage explosions and gore on display. It goes over the top and nuts in the best way. It's unfortunate then that it's brought down by Anderson's typical quick-cut editing, though I was still able to watch. The movie, it is generally well shot, although the environments can look a little drab, especially when the races take place in the same place. Every time. That it's a common fact that when anyone feels the need to defend the patchy career of Paul W.S. Anderson, they'll slap a mention of Event Horizon on the table, with all the smug confidence of a reverse UNO card, and then usually follow it up with a dame. Mortal Kombat was pretty cool. They're right, of course, as even a stopped clock is right twice a day. But one title from Anderson's filmography that almost never gets mentioned is his remake of Roger Corman's 1975 Engine. Revving satire, Death Race 2000, a movie that saw Sylvester Stallone take on David Carradine in a dystopian future, so camp, you'd think they'd be driving tents? Given everything at typically moody millennial makeover, Anderson took a similar route. He retooled George Romero's similarly satirical Dawn of the Dead by removing a vast amount of social commentary and focusing on a video game-style pace that brings maximum pain with minimum subtlety. Thanks to the collapse of the U.S. economy in 2012, I love it when dystopia movies pass their sell-by date. The skyrocketing crime rate has led to prisons becoming privatized, with some finding as many shifty ways of subsidizing their income by broadcasting death matches to a paying audience. One such prison is Terminal Island, whose warden, the glacial Thatcheresque Claire Hennessy, has created Death Race, a lethal game that sees heavily armed automobiles tearing each other to shreds as they hurtle around a track that's become insanely successful thanks to favorite racer, the Masted Frankenstein. However, there's a slight problem, as the mysterious driver kind of got himself killed during his last race due to the ongoing grudge match with fellow competitor Machine Gun Joe. As luck would have it, one of Terminal Island's brand new residents is Jensen Ames, an ex-driver come industrial worker who has been framed for the murder of his wife, and Hennessy is immediately on him to fill Frankenstein's mask, holding a ticket to freedom, and his infant daughter. As Lee agreeing, Ames is quickly introduced to Frankenstein's eccentric racing crew led by the Weisenleifer coach and his female co-passenger. Case Busta Latinx sidekicks are great for ratings, unsurprisingly. And before he knows it, Ames is knee-deep in bullets and twisted metal as Machine Gun. Joe, unaware that the real Frankenstein is actually dead, is eager to renew their feud. However, after making it through the first race, relatively unscathed, Ames starts to have suspicions that his frame job happened in order to specifically get him behind bars with his butt planted in Frankenstein's old bucket seat. Can he avoid more explosive T-bones than a petrol-soaked steakhouse in order to prove his innocence? This film, directed by Paul W. Anderson, written by Paul W. Anderson, produced by Paula Wagner, Jeremy Bolt, Paul W. This, Anderson, starring Jason Statham, Tyrese Gibson, Ian McShane, Joan Allen, cinematography, Scott Kevin, edited by Nyan Hoy, David Carr, Dallas Poe, music by Paul Hasslinger, production companies, Relativity Media, Impact Pictures, Crew / Wagner Productions, distributed by Universal Pictures, release states August 22nd, 2008 in United States, September 26, 2008 in United Kingdom, November 27th, 2008 in Germany. Running time 111 minutes. Countries: United States, Germany, United Kingdom. Language: English. Budget $45 to $65 million. Box office $76 million. So guys, this is the review of Death Race movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.